Now, this is going to be, I think it's going to be a short lecture anyway, but we'll see. If you've got lots of questions, maybe not. And that's fine too. So I just want to finish off the stuff we were doing the last day. You might remember this was the agenda we were kind of trying to work our way through, where the objective was to deploy our full stack app to AWS, where the full stack comprised of a React front end, and we had some APIs at the back end, as well as TMDB, which is really an API as well. So I'll finish off the discussion of this, and then I'll have a quick look at the assignment. And I just want to explain those parts of the assignment that relate to the integration with assignment one, I guess. You must remember now that the assignment two is predominantly a front end assignment. It's, you should be spending 85% of your effort on the React side, the integration with the back end. We'd like to do some integration with the back end. How much integration is up to you, really, in terms of what you're aiming for in terms of a mark. So just remember that it is predominantly a front end assignment. So you might remember the last day, what we did was, I guess we could visualize it like this. Um, we created a bundled version of our React app, and and um, we deployed that bundled version of our React app. And the bundled version just comprised really of only two files. One was an index.html, which was essentially just um, a template index.html. There was no content in it, but it did have a script reference to a JavaScript file. And that JavaScript file, which we refer to as the bundle, contained all of our Movies app code, as well as the node modules that code uses in JavaScript form. And it was minified and all of that kind of stuff. So really, there's only two files that we needed to deploy to our S3 bucket. We were using an S3 bucket. Really, we're only using the S3 bucket as uh, a file server, if you like. We're not using it as a website, even though you can configure an S3 bucket as being the host of a website. We're not building a website. We're building a web app. And I mentioned this to you the last day. So really, our S3 bucket is a source for files that uh, users want to download, really, locally. And we also introduced this idea of a content delivery network, because otherwise the S3 bucket becomes the only source for your various globally distributed users who want to access the files. So we created what's called a content delivery network using Amazon's CloudFront service. And that gave us essentially kind of what we're visualizing here. We've got these edge location servers distributed globally, where each of these edge location servers, whenever a user geographically close to an edge location server, makes a request for any particular file in our S3 bucket, the edge location server will download it. If it has never downloaded it before locally, then it will cache it locally. And that means then that if any subsequent users in the same geographical location want to access the same file, then the latency associated with their access is much quicker, because they're now getting it from a cached copy of the contents from the S3 bucket. So that was all fine. And I showed you the code to achieve all of that. So there is a GitHub repo that I'm making available to you. I don't know if any of you have cloned it or not. If you have cloned it before today, I did make a small update to it because you might remember I was having an issue last week with getting a status 500 error when I loaded my React app. Well, not so much when I loaded my React app into the browser, but when the React app in the browser tried to connect with the APIs that we had developed using API Gateway. We were getting a 500 status response, if you remember, even though the payload in the response was what we were looking for. Um, we were still getting a status 500. Now I've fixed that subsequently, so and I'll explain where the fix came from. Uh, so as I said, if you have cloned the repo, just do a git pull on it again to get the most up-to-date version of it. Right. So, and as well, in our case, we've got an API deployed to Amazon as well. So, I've got my API here, and when the React app is loaded into the user's local browser, then that React app can communicate directly just via HTTP or HTTPS with the API gateway in order to trigger whatever functionality is in our backend here, as well as talking to TMDB. And I explained how the React app can get the domain names associated with the generated APIs. I explained that pattern to you the last day. So where we left off was um, up to now, we were accessing our React app using a generated domain name from CloudFront. So, it's just a hash value really. I think it uses the .NET um, domain. But we'd like to have a custom domain name associated with our React app. And in my case, I had the custom domain movies.dermotoconnor.com. So uh, how do we achieve that? Okay, so that's where we left off. I'm going to fast forward to this slide here. And so I explained there's a couple of manual steps that you've got to do, and then everything in the box is what we do in our CDK code. Sorry now for going back over last week's stuff, but so number one, you've got to go in and buy a domain name for yourself. That's if you want to include this in your assignment 2 submission now, really. I suggested this oddly named porkbun.com as being the cheapest place to buy a domain name. If any of you know of a cheaper service, then might be a good idea just to publish the name of that service on Slack so that everybody else can avail of it. But it was fairly recently I came across this pork bun website that sells domain names. So, and I think it's probably the cheapest in the market. But so you buy your domain name either way. Then you've got to go into the AWS Management Console and create what's called a hosted zone. And I showed you the last day how to do that. When you create the hosted zone, you create a hosted zone for your domain name. So I happened to buy my domain name on AWS, as I mentioned the last day. And my domain name was dermotoconnor.com. So I've got to create a hosted zone with the same name, which is this one here. Local is always available to you. And when you create your when you create your hosted zone, initially it will just have 2 records on it, these 2 here. Let's see, yeah, these 2 here. And also in terms of manual steps, you've got to take the name servers that have been assigned to your hosted zone by AWS, and you've got to kind of essentially register those name servers with your domain name on the platform that you bought the domain name from. Yeah. So, and that's the end of the manual steps that you've got to do. So we've Maria done 1, 2, and 3 now. 4 now involves CDK code. Because we've got a domain name and because we want all of our interaction between browser and our app over HTTPS, then we need to, sorry, not buy, but we need to get a certificate generated for us. You can get the service that you bought the domain name from to generate a certificate. But if you do it that way, then you've got to import that certificate into your CDK stack, which I've never done really. So, but you don't have to go that route. You can generate the certificate, even though you bought your domain name from a service other than Amazon. You can get Amazon to or AWS to generate the certificate for you. So now we can go look at the code, I suppose, go back to our code. And so the last day, while this app that you have access to is comprised of 2 stacks. The last day we spent all of our time just looking at this stack here. This is the stack that deploys our front end. In other words, it creates the S3 bucket, it creates the CloudFront distribution, it hooks the two up together, and also it created our APIs, our auth API and our app API. Our auth API is the exact same as we've done for assignment 1. The app API in my case was just a simple demo one. So it just comprised of one Lambda, this Lambda here. Now, what you will be doing for the assignment is you will be copying in the lambdas that you developed for assignment 1. You'll be copying them into this lambdas folder. You can leave the auth folder exactly as it is. By the way, I would recommend that you use this code that I'm providing you with. You should use that as the starting point for the integration between your React app and the APIs that you developed in assignment 1. And so copy over the lambdas, the app lambdas, as opposed to the auth lambdas. Copy in the app lambdas from assignment 1, copy them into this lambdas folder. And as I said, leave the auth as it is, because we know that definitely works. So there are the lambdas, and then the actual stack, sorry, the actual APIs then, in terms of the assignment, what you will need to do is to go into this construct and flesh it out so that it represents your app API. In my case, it's quite simple because there's only one endpoint because I've only got one Lambda, the demo Lambda. So you need to do that. For the auth API construct, you can leave that exactly as it is, and that's going to work fine for you. In terms of fixing the error the last day, the 500 error that I was getting the last day, the problem was caused by, so here's where we create our API gateway instance for our app API. And there was one configuration setting that I was missing, which was this one here. Okay, so that's that, including that fixed the error for me. The default, so it looks like we're setting a endpoint type. There are 3 endpoint types. I don't want to go into the detail of it, but just give you a small bit of background. There's 3 endpoint types: custom, regional, and edge. The default setting for it, because I didn't set it explicitly last week, the default setting is edge, which is not what we want. We want it to be regional. And you can read up on it if you need to as to what's the difference between edge and regional, but doesn't concern us really for the assignment. Okay, so I guess there's an yeah. So I'm saying that you should take this file that we're looking at right now and flesh it out. Uh, don't overwrite it with the stack file that you have from assignment one. Assignment one. Well, you can if you want to, but you just need to remember that this property is set uh, in your API gateway. I can't remember when we were looking at the API gateway earlier in the semester. Did I set this property at all? I don't think I did, which means it was defaulting to Edge, even though it was working fine when we communicated with it from Postman. Right. Um, so so uh, the the stack that we were looking at the last day was comprised of the auth API construct, the app API construct, and the front end construct. The front end construct, you remember, was where we created our S3 buckets to be the location of our files, and we created our CloudFront distribution, et cetera, et cetera. And we also I showed you how to dynamically connect up the URLs or the domain names of your backend with your React app. That was all via this construct here that we created, this data structure that we created, and we deployed. Sorry, we stored this data structure in the same S3 bucket that contains our React app by virtue of that line of code there. So all of that really I have explained in detail last week. That's why I'm not going into any great detail this week. Right, back to our app file, if you might call it, our CDK app file. So the second stack. Now I just decided to break it up into two stacks. I could well have broken it up into, gosh, I could have had one stack for my APIs, another stack for my front end. You can break it up any way you want to. I wouldn't necessarily break it up in any other way than I've broken it up here. But so anyway, in my case, it's just two stacks. This is the stack that we are going to use to create our certificate. And I did say to you, and it's also mentioned in the slides, that to create a certificate for your domain name, you've got to use the Amazon ACM service. That's the Amazon Certificate Manager service. Now, you can use that service in any region, but if you want to create a certificate, the only region that you are allowed to do that on is the US East 1 region, which is why I'm passing that as the region for this particular stack. Also, if you've got a what's called a cross-region stack, sorry, a cross-region app, as in the stacks are um, the stacks are deployed in different regions, which is the case in this instance because we've got one stack in the EUS one and we've got another stack in the US East one. When you've got that, you've just got to remember to set this property to true for both stacks. I haven't looked into the detail as to what uh, is why that's the case, but there are obvious reasons if you're doing a cross region stack. So if we just look at this stack, then really that's the only new code. Although the consequence now of introducing this stack, because this stack, it's what it's going to do is it's going to create the certificate, as I said, and we need to um, export that certificate from the stack that I've highlighted and essentially kind of pass it into the other stack because the other stack needs the certificate as part of the configuration of your CloudFront distribution, as you'll see. So let's look at the detail of this stack. There's not a lot in it actually, which is here. Okay. The first thing I've got to do is I've essentially got to get a reference to the hosted zone that I created in Route 53. Route 53, as you know, is a global service. It's not region specific. So all I'm doing in the code that I've highlighted here is I'm essentially doing a lookup of Route 53 for my account, and I'm looking up a reference for a reference to a hosted zone. And the way do a lookup is you provide attributes of the hosted zone, and the code um, will take care of getting the actual reference to that hosted zone. So it looks like what I'm passing as attributes is the region associated with, sorry, I'm passing in the zone name, which is essentially my custom domain name. Domain here is coming from the environments file that I mentioned to you the last day. Where is it? There we go. This file here. Yeah, you might remember I just set some, rather than hard coding them into my CDK code, I've just created a sort of an equivalent of an environments file. So I'm passing it essentially the name of the zone, and I'm also passing it the ID of the zone. Where do you get the ID from? You get the ID, if we go into the hosted zones, no, I'm sure you'll be able to find it if you just poked around, but sorry, no, just expand this part here. And in my case, that's my hosted zone ID. So by providing those two attributes, that allows my CDK code to get a reference to the hosted zone. And if I just do a Command K, Command I on this thing, that's the type of um, that variable. The reason I'm mentioning that is because I do want to share the hosted zone reference with the other stack. If you look up here, you can see here I've got two public read properties. When you've got a multi-stack app, typically you want to share some information between the stacks. Now, in the case of this application, I want to share the hosted zone reference and the certificate reference that are created or generated from this stack here. I want to share those or pass them into the other stack. And when you've got a multi-stack app, the way you do that is the stack that wants to export some stuff, in my case, this one here, uh, the the properties that you want to export, you just create them as public read properties of the stack class itself. And I'll show you in a moment then how you actually access them within the other stack. So that's fine. Here's where we generate our certificates. It needs to know the domain name, the full domain name. In my case, I decided that I want to use movies.dermotoconnor.com as the subdomain really within my custom domain, which is going to be linked to my React app. So that's what that's all about. Subdomain is just a local little variable that I've declared up here. So I'm giving it the subdomain, and here really is where I'm linking the certificate with my hosted zone. Okay, so that's to a certain degree. It's boilerplate code. So that creates my ACM certificate. And just for cleanup purposes, I'm indicating that whenever my stack is destroyed, then I want the certificate to be destroyed as well. And here's where I initialize the two public read-only variables I'm initializing them here. And that's it really. That's all that's in the, so really the only thing that's really necessary within the stack um, is this here. Although I guess the lookup of the hosted zone is necessary as well because the certificate needs it. So that's all that's in that stack. Now, we need to pass in though, we need to pass the certificate and the hosted zone reference into the other stack. So if I now bring up the other stack, or maybe if I go back to this file here, so here's the other stack as I'm calling it, and I am indeed passing in the certificate and I'm passing in the reference to the hosted zone. Okay, if I look at the other stack, before I look at the specifics of this, first of all, in general, when you've got a stack and you want to pass some custom data into that stack, this is what you've got to do. By default, a stack, if we look at the constructor for a stack in general, as in here, okay, the constructor expects three properties. It expects the what's called the scope. The scope is always the current app, really. Some sort of ID for the construct in general. And then the last property, the last argument is the props, the properties or the kind of data that you want to pass into your stack. Now, the default type of the props variable, its default type is stack props, this type here. But stack props isn't enough in my case. I want to extend it, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm extending it by adding on some extra properties. Well, I'm not really extending this construct. I'm creating a new construct, which is comprised of stack props and my two additional properties. I'm calling this type infra props, and I'm now making that the data type for this. So that means now my stack here that we're looking at, uh, as well as the default props that you can pass into any stack, we are able to pass in the certificate and the hosted zone reference into this specific one. I mean, by default, the default properties associated with stack props, where we can see that some of the defaults, one of the defaults is this here. So every stack can be passed in an env property, which is comprised of, amongst other things, a region and an account ID. So let's go back. I'm jumping around a lot now, I know. So we have looked at this infra stack at the last day, but that's where I create my user pool and my client for accessing the user pool. I create an instance of my auth API and my app API. That's okay. We discussed that the last day. I create an instance of my front end construct, and it's the front end construct that needs the certificate and the hosted zone reference passed into it, which means we can now go on to the front end. We looked at a lot of the front end construct the last day, but if we now go back to it with particular interest in where we use the certificate, okay, that's the structure of the props that I'm passing into a construct. And I guess if we just go down, it's mainly in the CloudFront distribution, which is here. So we need to set the certificate property of your CloudFront distribution You also need to set the domain names plural, although we only have one name, movies.dermotoconnor.com. So that's going to link that domain name with this CloudFront distribution. And finally, what we need to do is we need to add a new record to our hosted zone entry. And what this record does is it actually forms the link between, it forms a link at a routing level between your domain, your app's domain name, movies.dermotoconnor.com, and the CloudFront distribution that we have created. So whenever a user enters movies.dermotoconnor.com into their browser and requests that within the DNS, the global DNS network, it's going to form the link between that domain name and the domain name of your CloudFront distribution. Because remember, I showed you the last day, when you do create a CloudFront distribution, that distribution does get its own domain name. It's a randomly generated hash value .net. But so we're just simply linking my custom domain name with the domain name of the CloudFront distribution so that the redirection can happen. And that's it, really. There's nothing else new in. That's how we form the connection. And if I just go back and reference the slides, it's kind of what I'm saying here in the in this box here. So I've shown you creating the certificate, attaching the certificate to your CloudFront distribution, which I've just been talking about. And number three, add an A record to your hosted zone to form the link between your custom domain name and the domain name of the CloudFront distribution. Right. I pause for questions, even though you may not have any. You certainly would need to go back and look at this code, I guess. In terms of what else is in this repo, you can see that there is a folder here. I've just put in this folder called reference only, and it is what it's meant to be, right? This is only contains reference stuff. Really, what I've done here is I've put in the key parts of the changes that we had to make on the React side in order to get our React app communicating with our API gateway instances. So I talked my way through that the last day, if you remember. So and I've kind of put the files where they will have to be on your React apps side. So for example, the config.js file that needs to be in the SRC folder. In my case, in the API folder, in the TMDB file, that's where I essentially import that config file. And in the config file, that's where we actually that's where we download the config.js from the bucket. And that config.js contains the URLs, the domain names, stroke URLs of our Auth API and App API. And I talked my way through this stuff the last day, which is, so I'm not going to go talking through them again, these two functions. So the config.js, the changes you've got to make to TMDB API.ts, and then well, just for demonstration purposes, as you might remember the last day, I just made a change to the homepage.tsx where I put in my two use effect hooks to trigger communication with my Auth API and my App API. Where are they again? Those two there. Okay. But that was just for demonstration purposes. You may not You may need to put your use effect hooks somewhere else in your code, depending on what you want to achieve. Um, Let me just go to my notes. So that's fine. We've kind of covered this stuff. When you've got a, excuse me, when you've got a multi-stack app, this is the way you deploy. This is the way you deploy it. You've got to specify which stacks you want to deploy. You can deploy them individually. If you want to deploy all of them, then you've just got to use the minus minus all flag in the CDK deploy, and similarly for CDK destroy. Uh, I've tried to just highlight the reference only folder, what its purpose is. Like when you're working on this assignment and when you get to the stage where you want to do the integration, admittedly now it's going to be a little bit clumsy. You'll essentially be, let's say this is my React app. This is your React app that you're doing some development on. Um, and you have to build a production or static version of this app, of your React app, using the npm run build command that we saw the last day. That, as we know, the last day creates this dist folder, and you have to manually copy the contents of the dist folder, copy that over into the site folder of your full stack uh, um, full stack project, okay, into here, in other words. So that kind of building and manually copying over, that is a bit clunky, admittedly, but we envisage only working on the integration, as I said at the very outset, for a small period of time. It will certainly not be the dominant part of this, so you won't be doing that a lot. Um, if you don't want to go down the custom domain name, if all you want to do is have a CloudFront distribution, then I can just quickly explain the edits that you need to make. Some of them are obvious, so you can just simply comment out that stack. Now you will get some compilation errors as a result of just commenting that out. Uh, you can simply just comment out these two here. They're no longer relevant. And the reason I'm getting errors there now is because you've also then got to go into your, let's see, you've got to go into the full stack stack, which is in here. And if you simply let's see, yeah, if you make this zone property optional, you can see certificate is optional. I decided to make that. I couldn't make the zone optional, um, but we are in this case now. So we just make that optional. Finally, go into the front end construct. And similarly, make this optional. And the last thing you've got to do is go to um, your CloudFront distribution, disable that line, and disable this line. I think my code should be clean now. Still complaining about something. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Last thing is you've got to remove that. Okay. This is the standard error. This it's not a concern. So my code is clean now again, and I've got all the, you can see I've got all the main files opened. So you now can do a CDK deploy of that, and what you will get is a CloudFront distribution fronting your S3 bucket. We also have the integration of our front end and back end. That's all there in as well. So the only thing that's missing is the custom domain name parts of it. Yeah. Right. In terms of the assignment spec and the part of it that concerns what I've done with G. So if you're if you're only if you're happy just to aim for the good grade, then you can just simply deploy your React app into an S3 bucket and forget about where are we? Forget about CloudFront altogether. Sorry, I did the wrong thing. Beg your pardon. Uh, yeah, here. Okay, and jumping around now, but if I go back to my slides, clearly from, you can tell probably from the names of the two GitHub repos, this GitHub repo is the one that we've been looking at predominantly, but this GitHub repo contains the CDK code for, I just realized. Oh yeah, sorry. This is the one that we've been looking at predominantly. This GitHub repo just shows you the code for deploying your React app into an S3 bucket as a website. Okay. I mean, technically, our React app in its bundled form is also, it's kind of could be regarded as a website. It has a HTML file, albeit one HTML file, and that contains a reference to a JavaScript file. So, we can actually deploy it as a website and it will work fine. So there's no CloudFront distribution or anything going on in this GitHub repo. So if you're aiming just for the good, then take that repo that I've just been talking about, clone it and uh, change it has a site folder as well, and just copy over your React app into that site folder and do your CDK deploy, and you have your S3 bucket. That stack will generate a URL for your S3 bucket, and that URL becomes the URL for accessing your React app within a browser. We don't get a bucket URL when we're bring CloudFront and all the other stuff into it. In terms of integration, I'm just saying you could hard code the URL of your app API from assignment one and just demonstrate, let's say, having a web page in your React app which displays all of your movie reviews and just display all of them, having retrieved them from your app API on uh, um, on Amazon. So, there's no, it's just hard coded integration really. Uh, so we're not using the auth API at all for that grade band. If we move on to the very good grade band, then I'm suggesting that you now do bring in CloudFront, but only CloudFront, no custom domain name. And I've showed you how to edit the project that I'm giving you to achieve that. In terms of integration, it can still be manual, but you should integrate the auth API. And so What specifically I'm looking for is have a login page in your React app which allows a user to log in. And the only time that login page is triggered is when the user tries to access a private route within your React app. So up here, Frank is talking about having public and private routes. Um, he's talking about them here, right? So that's really means public and private pages within your React app. So if a user tries to access a private page within your React app, and that private page now is more than likely retrieving some other TMDB data. It's not your custom API data. If the user tries to access a private page, then your React app should display a simple login page for username and password. The user enters a username and password, and now your React app should connect with the auth API and validate those credentials. In other words, use the sign-in Lambda that we developed for assignment 1. I think I mentioned to you last day, there's no need to support registration and confirming registration of users in your React app. You can register a user or users using Cognito and confirm their registration using Cognito. The only thing you need to support within your React app is user sign-in. Okay. For the excellent grade band, that's where we bring in uh, full stack integration. So we're using that pattern that I talked about the last day, where you at deployment time you get the domain names of your auth API and your app API. You put them into a simple uh, JSON structure, and you store that JSON structure as a JSON file in the same bucket that you're deploying your React app to, and then you add the necessary code to your React app, which retrieves that JSON file. Yeah. So we'd like to see that for this grade band. And in terms of uh, using the integration, I'm suggesting you should support posting reviews to your DynamoDB table from your React app. The React app that you developed with Frank includes a view that allows a user to write their own review. Well, we'd like you to be able to persist that data back to your DynamoDB table. Now, if you remember in assignment 1, we made some of the endpoints of our app API protected. I'm suggesting that you relax that in this assignment. So we won't be looking for any protected endpoints in your app API. You might remember it involved using cookies and passing a cookie to the API gateway, and then API gateway used an authorizer Lambda to uh, validate the cookie, which contained the JWT token, all that stuff. You don't need to include that at all in this assignment too, mainly because I'm a little bit nervous about using cookies and sending cookies from a browser-based app back to API gateway. I haven't proven it myself. For sure, it's doable, but I haven't gone through the process, and I don't want you to be hitting any issues that aren't really related to React. That would be more a API gateway issue. And as I've said it once or twice now already, this assignment is really more a React assignment. So um, make the post endpoint a public endpoint for this assignment. Lastly, in the outstanding grade band, that's where you bring in everything that I've talked about in the last 2 weeks, your custom domain name, etc., and everything else that we've mentioned so far. Now, if you want to I guess if in the excellent and certainly in the outstanding grade bands, if you want to extend the backend app API, for example, saving if you're creating your fantasy movie and you want to persist that to DynamoDB, you would only need to, and I'm not suggesting you do, but if you are considering that, that would be considered in the outstanding grade band. Um, yeah. So there were one or two other little things that were in the original specification, which I have taken out. For example, I think in the excellent grade band, there was a bullet point here, I think, which talked about deployment to Vercel. Um, Vercel is a platform where you can deploy React apps and other types of single page apps. But clearly that doesn't apply this year. We didn't cover any of the Amazon stuff with in last year's module. We covered some other material instead, so it made sense in the context of last year, but not this year. And that's really, I think, all I want to mention to you. Again, I'll just pause in case there are any questions in relation to what we're looking for in assignment two, in particular related to the integration between your React app and the assignment one. Any questions that you might have relating to the React app itself, you can direct to Frank. I don't know if Frank is actually online or not now. He may not be. Doesn't matter. I'll contact him anyway. Send him a Slack message when I'm finished, and he'll join. He'll join this meeting in case you've got any questions for him. But from my side of it, are there any questions that you have? No. Just bear with me for 1 second. Hi.
Yes, I am. Yep,
Yeah,
just
no,
joined
I
in.
actually I should have checked with the class first whether they had any questions, but I
No,
did.
it's okay. I said I wasn't even. I said I'd wait for you to contact me, but that's
Yeah,
fine. If they don't, that's fine. It doesn't. There's no requirement to have questions. But I just said I was online when you sent the message there. So look, if there is anybody that has any questions that we can answer, I'll also attend the lab on Thursday as well. So I'll be there for that. I'll also be. I'll open a Zoom link for that. A Zoom meeting for that lab on Thursday as well, just in case you have any questions before, it's the last week and it's the last lab in case you have any questions, particularly about the assignment, or any of the labs as well, for that matter.
yeah, I think they're happy enough actually so far anyway. So
Okay. Fair enough. Fair
yeah,
enough.
I think that's it really. I'll just give them one more chance in case anything came to mind for them. No, that's
All
fine.
good.
False alarm, Frank. I should have
That's
checked
all right.
first. Okay, folks, we'll leave it at that. I don't know, did you mention to them, Frank, that we actually plan to do face-to-face demos of the assignment two? Did you mention anything to them
I
about
didn't. No, it's a
it?
good point.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mention that yet, so we do. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll schedule them, pretty much immediately after the hand update. So just we'll get back to you maybe with a schedule of demos. The demos will probably be about a 20-minute each, guess, where you just demonstrate the stuff, and then there might be a little bit of Q&A after. But you should also send in your video recordings with your submission, because we might have a quick look at those before the actual demos.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's
And,
great.
and just to mention that both of us will attend those demos as well. So it'll be
Yeah,
both.
yeah.
Stearns will be there.
Okay, folks, we'll leave it at that, and uh, best of luck in the rest of your studies. Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you guys. Bye bye. Talk to you Thursday.